Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Quick Conversations. My name is Jerry L. Johnson. This week we'll be sitting down with incredible artist, activist, and entrepreneur Maimouna, aka Mumu Fresh Youssef, as well as Grammy Award winning artist, activist, historian, and philanthropist Dom Flemons. Dom and Maimouna are going to discuss with us today the origins of some of our favorite music, the genres that they represent, and where they've evolved into today's musical landscape. And so, as a quick reminder, this will be recorded via Zoom for playback on Facebook, and any additional recording of this program without the express written permission of the Recording Academy is prohibited. So, thank you again, Dom. Thank you again, Maimouna. Go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you all for having us today. My name is Maimouna and Youssef. I'm really excited to be here with Dom Flemons. He is an incredible historical resource, and I have plenty of questions to ask you. Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here as well, and just to one of the things that's been beautiful, beside being an artist in my with my own music, I've just collected a lot of wonderful cultural history that it's been great to be able to spread some of this knowledge around to different folks, and actually, we had a conversation previously about words and genre names for different types of music. And of course, at the time we were talking about Lil Nas X and his song Old Town Road,
Yeah.
which at the time people were having a lot of trouble trying to justify if it was rap or synonymous as black music, or if it was country music, which is synonymous as white music. And because it kind of switched over genres in a bunch of ways, it led to a lot of controversy. But we were talking about that before, but I guess I'd want to ask you, have you run across any other situations where you found that the names of genres have been dictated in
Mhm.
one way or another by a collective or individuals, or,
Yeah, I think all of the names that we choose for genres on some level are indicative of race or economic background. I think that's true with all things in America. Everything is layered, whether they say it or not. Like urban could mean metropolitan, but metropolitan, means city for young white people. Urban is like city for black people. Um, the same thing, with pop music. This is an ongoing conversation. What is pop, right? Pop means popular, but they use it as a term um, that sounds more like whitewashed R&B music, that's more palatable to cross over to white audiences and that pays more money. So there are a lot of implications underneath those titles that add to the economic disparity between black and white artists. You know.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's something that's gone on since. I mean, we have so many people who are even living examples of the struggle. Like someone like, I guess I think like Quincy Jones, for example. I think about his story and being a very early black composer within a world that was completely white composers, and having to just prove his worth as a composer first, but then also as a representative of his race, as a not that it was something that had to be put on his shoulders, but I think it was something that, as a representative, as his the only person from his community, he just had to have that on his shoulders, and he still carries it to this day.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question, right? Because you said something earlier. You said country music is synonymous with white music. I want to know, what is white music in America? What music was created by white people?
Boy, it's a those definitions are changing all the time.
Mm,
Just like the United States in general, we're all built off of a lot of different cultures that immigrated to this country, and that includes even white people aren't just, there's no country called white and there's no country called black. So even
mhm.
these two definitions are sort of arbitrary in of themselves, because people have backgrounds that if you go back even one or two generations, you'll find that they come from a variety of places. But music is something that everybody can enjoy, just because it's one of the great communicators of life, and I think if someone hears a song or a piece of music they like, they're drawn to it, no matter who's playing it and what it means.
Absolutely.
you know. But when it comes to industry and business, just like a grocery store or a hardware store, you have to have categories and places where you need to go to find your specific needs, your specific products and goods and services. And I think in a way music is like that when you start to sell it to people. It's when you play it for people, I mean, it doesn't matter where you are or who it is. I think people just love music. But once it starts being marketed, and now we have 100 years of music marketing, at least with recorded music. And I think now is the time when we have to reanalyze these things. And I think a lot of those conversations are happening now.
So, but I do want to ask though, right? Because from my knowledge, like country music comes from, isn't it a derivative of the blues? Well, certain styles of country music is a derivative of the blues, which comes from like field hollers, which comes from slavery. But there are also other forms that come from like Celtic music in the mountains. So when you say country music, can you, it seems like it's very vast, it's varied. It doesn't have like, yeah, how can we call it? Yeah, I just want to know when did it become something that's seen as white music? Whereas if a black person does country music, it's like, oh, you're being white, or you're not, this isn't for you, if it finds its origins in the blues.
Well, I'll take us back exactly 100 years ago to 1920. And
Mm-hmm.
the OK record label recorded a song called The Crazy Blues, which was sung by an African American woman named Mamie Smith. And she was backed by an African American jazz band called the Jazz Hounds. And they were led by the fellow who wrote The Crazy Blues, a guy by the name of Perry Bradford. So Perry Bradford was a publisher. He's originally from Birmingham, Alabama. He was very popular on the black vaudeville circuit that was not recorded. All of the business in black vaudeville was done through sheet music and through live performance. And records didn't make enough money for these big stars to record at first. Later, you had people like Burt Williams and a variety of other vaudeville performers making records toward, let's say, 1915 all the way to 1920, say, just for the sake of conversation. But up to that point, you have Perry Bradford going from Florida, he goes up to Harlem, and he starts to have a hit on the off-Broadway stages with a song called the Harlem Blues that he had written and Mamie Smith was singing it. So being that the industry at that time was all in New York and New Jersey, because Thomas Edison, who patented sound recording, he was in New Jersey. So all of the industry was in this one place. And at that time, the industry was built on hyper-targeting ethnic audiences in New York City. So Polish people who had immigrated over, Italian people who had immigrated over, Greek people, they started making specialized genres for each of these communities. And so that was how they marketed them. They just hyper-focused and said, well, this neighborhood of New York has this ethnicity, so we're going to sell them the records of people who were famous in the old country, and they just made their own Americanized version of each of these ethnic genres in the States. So that's the first part. So by the time you have Perry Bradford, he has gone to the recording manager, Hagerman was the fellow's name at OK, and he starts to dog this guy about recording his song being sung by Mamie Smith, because he felt that a black woman singing a song was going to sell 1 million records. And so he was a publisher along with W.C. Handy and Clarence Williams, who are two great jazz publishers. So they all worked together. And he kept hounding OK Records to record Mamie Smith. There was an opportunity where a white vaudevillian, Sophie Tucker, couldn't make a session because of a recording contract issue. And so Mamie Smith was brought in. She recorded with the white orchestra that OK had at the time. And the records did all right. But Perry Bradford then came back and dogged Hagerman again to record with the jazz band, because he said that there was a Southern black audience that would buy 1 million copies of this record if he had a black woman singing the blues backed by a black jazz band playing improvised jazz on record. And so they finally okayed it, they green lighted it, and then he sold 1 million records. He put ads out in the Chicago Defender, and then he went through his networks through the black vaudeville circuit, and he let people know that the industry is putting money into our people, so we need to support. And everybody got behind that, and it became a million seller, and it created a genre called race records, built off of
Mm.
Booker
Oh, that
T.
was okay. That was Mamie Smith that spearheaded that. Now I
Uh-huh.
wonder how many points per record did she get of those
Yeah,
millions
well,
sold?
that,
That's the question.
but when you look into Mamie Smith's history, you find a lot of the blues divas, because of course this created a huge wave of blues divas. From, of course, Mamie Smith had uh, a very trained vaudevillian singing style, and that
Mhm.
was the trend for a while. People like Alberta Hunter, Ethel Waters followed in the wake of Mamie Smith. But then you had a woman by the name of Bessie Smith come along, who sang
Mhm.
with this beautiful down home singing. So like Mamie Smith, just to give you an example, for example, like so Mamie Smith, she would sing, I got the blues so bad, it hurt my feet to walk, Lord, my feet to walk. The song is very
Mhm.
melodic and very ragtime.
Yeah.
But Bess
Yes.
brought in, I got the blues so bad, it hurt my feet to walk. And when this came out of the
Mhm.
speakers, it changed people's lives because they
Yeah.
had never heard this type of down home singing. So it
Yeah.
changed the nature of race records. So then they started trying to
Mhm.
search for the more down home music. Again, this is a trend with black music from the beginning, to find that down home music that's just deep to the core. It's this way down in the woods, telling it like it
And
is.
you know what? It's funny because when I teach my students, especially international students who want to know how to sing soul music, I always tell them you cannot sing soul without understanding the experiences and the trauma that created that sound that is so heart wrenching and so that sound that reaches inside of your guts and drags you along with it so I find when you can't empathize with black people and black people's struggle, you'll never be able to sing soul music, not
That's
truly the way, not in a soulful way. That's a part of the sound, is the experience. You can't extrapolate the two because you don't want to deal with the experience that created it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when they built the race music genre, they then created a second genre to accommodate for Southern working class white people. And that
Hmm.
became what they called hillbilly records, which is again is another pejorative. So they created these two terms that are pejorative terms to most people nowadays, race and hillbilly, and that defined black and white music at first. And so, but it was a catch-all umbrella to where you had everything from the Fisk Jubilee singers to Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and also like someone like Roland Hayes, and then the Mississippi Sheiks and Charlie Patton, all within the race genre. And
Yeah.
then you have in the hillbilly, you have everything from Jimmy Rogers to people like Fiddlin' John Carson, all the way to Riley Puckett, and even people like eventually Hank Williams would be defined as a hillbilly artist as well, or James Brown was a race artist. But of course, these guys, by the time they came along in the 40s and 50s, they had transcended the genres, and Billboard then recognized these musics as not just race and hillbilly, but then they redefined them as rhythm and blues, which
Hmm.
included jump blues, swing, and then they made country and western, which include western music, western swing, and music that was more akin to jukeboxes. And so then that really set a path for defined black and white music, because by then the audience had a sense of what black and white music should be. And
Hmm.
we built all of our popular music off of this early R&B, which would become rock and roll, which would become
Hmm.
soul and funk, and also with country, it becomes just like a honky tonk, and it becomes all of these new modern alternative countries as well. So it's this is where we have these precedents set. So when a black artist comes in and does music that is not black music as it's defined, it comes off as a complete conundrum. Just like a white artist, when they come in and do what is considered black music, it makes the audience kind of scratch their heads and say, "Hold on, wait a second, how did this happen?" Just because
Hmm.
we've been trained over many a hundred.
Yeah, it's like Jim Crow in within music because
Right.
I mean you can almost say that marketing in and itself is kind of inherently racist or inherently separatist, because they didn't have to market it that way, like to separate people intentionally, because music is what brings people together. Like, is there a way to sell music, without having to separate people into racial groups?
Well, I think so. Now, in the 21st century, we have progressed in leaps and bounds in certain ways compared to 100 years ago. I think
Mhm.
the thing that we have to understand too is that strict segregation was brought in around 1900, and so these are
Mhm.
reflective of 2 decades of strict segregation. So in some ways, it's a system that was deep in place. But by the 1960s and 70s, that's why so many of the fights of black artists having mainstream coverage on the radio
Mhm.
as well as on the
Yeah.
television, and all of the
Mhm.
humanistic stories of bringing black artists into the forefront as well as artists from rural communities that are doing country music into the forefront. That's why this has been the conversation for decades, in the past 3 or 4 decades, is because these genre lines were created and they were arbitrary. But what happens when you have a young black kid who sits and listens to the Grand Ole Opry when he grows up? He loves country
Mhm.
music, and then he wants to play that country music. He comes to an obstacle, but he's so good that they can't help but give him country hits. And that's more or less the story of Charlie Pride, a man from rural Mississippi who
Mhm.
sounded like a country singer, even though at first he didn't look like one, and he had many different steps in his career that they had to sidestep around his race. But music always conquers overall. That's the thing I found at the end of the day, is music can always convey a message that social boundaries would never let us have.
But I think history also ignores all of the black cowboys and the history of black presence and black contribution to Southern culture in general. I mean, my family's from Mississippi. They didn't come to the North until the Klan was chasing my uncle, and then everyone ran to Mississippi. But I mean, sorry, ran to Chicago. But the contributions of black people to all music that's American music. You can't talk about any music in America if you don't talk about that contribution. And then why is that contribution intentionally trying to be erased? Like, what are you getting out of erasing that and saying, well, you don't, this is not something for you, you don't belong here, when you've contributed to those sounds, you know?
Yeah, well, for me, I feel that there's a beautiful opportunity at the current moment to push this conversation forward, because I feel up until the present day, it
Mm.
it has seemed too far reaching. It has
Mm.
seemed like it might have seemed like too much of an ask. But
Really?
this year specifically, we're finding for the first time people are saying no more, and they want to push the
Yeah.
peg forward. And that's one of the reasons I'm a cultural historian. I became a professional musician because I found I had learned all these stories by being interested in a lot of different types of music. But then I found that there were stories that needed to be told because they weren't in the forefront. And for me, I feel there's a rich tapestry that can be displayed that can allow us to really view the music as it should be viewed, which is a shared culture instead of it being so specifically one thing or another. Of course, we don't want to downplay the contributions of the influencers, of the mentors, and the people who have fueled the music forever, which, of course, so many African American artists, for every African American artist we have heard recorded, there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, that were not recorded and did not see their days. So yeah, I mean, we should always keep elevating and keep pushing forward, push that narrative, and fill in those spaces that whether whether being actively misrepresented or underrepresented, or whether it was subconsciously misrepresented, because also people in the past don't know the things we know now. And I feel like now, as modern people, we have an opportunity to be able to reanalyze and be able to use the things we know now to be true, to help expand the way that we think of our culture. And I think that's just happening right now. It hasn't
Yeah.
had a chance to really do it at any moment before.
But I think what's important about people understanding the history of music. So again, since COVID started, I started a new business. I started a music education online program, and one of the main questions that when students enroll, they ask me is, how do you sing with so much spirit? Right? Because I didn't grow up in the church. Like most artists who sing soul music or sing R&B, they all came up in the church. My family is Muslim. So I never grew up in a church, but my grandmother was a choir director at a Baptist church, and she's also Native American. So I learned, is my mic doing something weird? So I learned gospel songs, like escape songs, Native American songs. Like I learned all of those songs from my grandmother in the summertime. And the way she would teach me to sing would be to do chores, so I would like have to shuck corn and pick greens and, carry water and mop the floors. Like, and while I'm cleaning, she would tell me stories about her childhood. And then in between, whenever it came to her mind, she would just start singing a song, and she would sing it over and over and say, all right, you've heard enough time, now sing now. I said, well, I don't know this song. Feel it. Don't tell me what you don't know. Feel it, And so she really taught me how to sing with my spirit. And that is, that's like my compass, my starting point. And it's hard sometimes because what I've noticed about younger artists or just artists who grow up, they learn to sing by the radio. They don't have the spirit of the lineage, of our history, of our oral history and musical history, and even students who have spent time learning music through college, they also don't understand the spirit of the sound. And there's kind of a homogenized vocal tone, texture, and performance that you hear all singers kind of do. They reach to this one melodyne auto-tune sound that really is devoid of the inflections, I think, that come with storytelling, that come with knowing the lineage and the histories, how you got to this point. Like all of those stories, I think, are so necessary to creating what your sound is. And I started off teaching just singing and songwriting. I realized I can't even teach it to you without helping you understand how we got here and helping you find your own vocal lineage.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny that you said it exactly in the way you did, where you learn singing from a series of tasks or daily activities. It's not just I'm turning on my singing voice. There's a series of it's life. Singing is life. And that's one thing that's beautiful about folk music, because it's a learned experience. It's not a trained experience. And that's one of the things as well when we define Black music.
Wow. So obviously those two have a lot to share and talk about when it comes to the evolution of genres. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and pause right here, and we will be back with part 2 next week. See you soon.